5 backpacks buried under a playground, 1 notebook inside. We found the tunnel. It's real. No bodies, no answers. But what came next will chill you to the bone. But first, let's go back to the beginning. They left just before dusk, when the air in Arbor Point shimmered with golden heat and the sound of cicadas echoed off picket fences. Tyler had a new GoPro strapped to his helmet. Mia wore her older brother's hoodie, too big and too warm for June, but comforting. Hannah packed 2 grape sodas and a granola bar in her faded canvas backpack, just in case. Jordan had joked about beating his own record on the hill, and Connor, quiet, observant Connor, carried a pocket knife in his sock, just to be safe. 5 kids with scraped knees, shared secrets, and the illusion of invincibility rode off on a trail they all knew by heart. Only this time, they never came back. The search began within the hour. Lisa Morgan called Tyler's cell, and it rang twice before going straight to voicemail. That small delay gave her hope. When the other parents called too and got the same result, panic spread like blood in water. Sheriff Darrell checked the usual spots: the gas station, the lake dock, the abandoned silo. Volunteers scoured trails with flashlights, dogs barked into the woods, and helicopters buzzed overhead by morning. But by the second day, it became clear. They hadn't just gone missing. They'd vanished. Their bikes, lying in a neat row at the forest's edge, looked almost staged. No scuff marks, no disturbed earth. Helmets clipped to handlebars, all facing east toward the trees. There was no rustling, no trace of movement deeper in, just dense thicket and silence. Search dogs refused to move past the tree line, whining and tugging their handlers away. Some said it was the heat. Others muttered about old land curses, stories passed down through gritted teeth from long-gone ranchers who once fenced that land and then abandoned it. But the families refused superstition. Lisa Morgan organized nightly vigils, lighting 5 candles every evening by the War Memorial downtown. Jordan's father, Mike, drained his savings installing billboards along every nearby highway, plastered with their faces. Smiling, hopeful, unaware. "Have you seen them?" they asked. Drivers looked, but no one called. Eventually, the flyers curled and yellowed under sun and snow. By year's end, the Amber Alert had expired. The official search was scaled back, and media interest evaporated like dew. Arbor Point carried on. New playgrounds, new elections, new problems. The town willed itself into forgetting. But memory doesn't rot, it hardens. And beneath the surface of routine and renewal, something festered in silence, because 5 families still left the porch light on, waiting for a knock that never came. By 2027, Arbor Point Park bore little resemblance to the patch of land it once was. The weather-worn benches had been replaced with curved aluminum seating, the mulch traded for spongy rubber tiles in pastel hues, and the old slide, the towering, rust-stained monolith that had creaked ominously in the wind, had been removed and replaced with a sleek blue spiral model. To the families who frequented it now, the park was a symbol of safety and suburbia, bordered by townhomes with neat hedges and solar panels glinting on rooftops. Laughter drifted lazily through the air. It was a place where things were supposed to feel clean, controlled, forgotten. Then came the dig. The city had approved a new shaded pavilion beside the slide, a minor project, hardly worth a permit delay. The excavation crew, on day 3, broke through the soft soil and struck something strange. Not rock, not root. Plastic. Black. Bulging. The site was cordoned off. Parents pulled their children away mid-swing, mid-sandcastle, mid-laugh. Phones came out. Rumors bloomed like mold. Police arrived before the first bag was even fully unearthed. 1 bag turned to 2, then 3, then 5. Each was wrapped meticulously, sealed with duct tape, though time had found its way inside. The nylon interiors had rotted to sludge in places. Straps frayed, colors faded. But what survived chilled the air like a sudden drop in pressure. Each bag bore a name, stitched in careful block letters no machine could mimic. Thread faded but legible. Tyler, Hannah, Jordan, Mia, Connor. A silent wind passed through the scene like recognition. Evidence techs worked methodically, placing each backpack into its own sealed case. The contents varied: an iPod Classic with a cracked screen, a folded class schedule for spring 2010, a charm bracelet tangled in a hair tie. But in Tyler's, nestled between a crushed energy bar wrapper and a dried-out marker, was something far more unsettling: a spiral-bound notebook with the corners softened by moisture and time. The ink bled, the cover warped, but a few pages remained legible. One entry, the last one, stood out, written in jagged, rushed script, as though whoever held the pen was shivering or trying to finish before someone returned. "We found the tunnel. It's real." No further context, no map, no dates, just those 6 words, a whisper across 17 years of silence. And suddenly, the polished playground, the symbol of healing, became a crime scene. Not a grave, but a message. The past hadn't decayed. It had been waiting. Detective Rachel Monroe stood just outside the taped-off dig site, arms crossed, eyes locked on the plastic evidence containers being wheeled into the forensics van. The park was quiet now, cleared of children, echoing with the heavy silence of revelation. She could still see the blue slide towering above the scene like a monument to negligence, innocence warped by time. She was 12 when they vanished. She remembered the candlelight vigils, the posters stapled to telephone poles, the hush that fell over her middle school when someone mentioned Tyler or Hannah. Her older sister, Chloe, had been in their class. She remembered the moment Chloe stopped biking alone. That summer had ended childhood for all of them. She hadn't planned to come back to Arbor Point. Denver offered a buffer: urban cases, high volume, emotional detachment. But when the call came in, 5 bags, 5 names, Monroe didn't hesitate. It wasn't nostalgia. It was something sharper, colder, a memory that had never dulled. At the evidence lab, she hovered behind the technician, examining the notebook. The ink had bled in places, but some portions had survived intact. They were running material tests: age, soil trace, humidity exposure. But Monroe wasn't interested in the paper. She wanted the prints. The lab called her just after 1 a.m. "We pulled one clean partial," the tech said, "and it's not from any of the 5 kids." That changed everything. Monroe had already begun reassembling the case files: paper reports scanned into ancient databases, grainy photos from the search parties, the original interviews. She worked in silence, piecing timelines back together like bones. Her first stop was Lisa Morgan, Tyler's mother. The woman had aged past grief into something colder, calcified. She lived in a small apartment near the edge of town now, surrounded by old news clippings and an untouched bedroom shrine. She didn't rise when Monroe entered. "You here to apologize?" Lisa asked, voice brittle. "No," Monroe said softly. "I'm here to start again." Lisa studied her, eyes sharp and hollow. "You know how many times they reopened this? 3, and they always closed it again." "I'm not them." "No, but you're wearing the same badge." There was silence between them. Then Lisa leaned back, arms folded. "Don't you dare give me hope," she whispered. Monroe didn't flinch. She had something better than hope now. She had evidence. The fingerprint match didn't belong to a student. Not a teacher either. Not anyone who should have had their hands on that notebook. It belonged to someone who had stayed close, someone who had never left the park. Carl Banning had never drawn much attention. In staff photos from Arbor Point Elementary, he always stood at the edge, slightly hunched, eyes downcast, expression unreadable. He wore the same faded denim jacket year after year, stitched at the shoulder where a seam had split. Parents hardly noticed him. Teachers referred to him with a shrug, reliable, a little odd, but harmless. The kind of man who slipped through the cracks not because he was hiding, but because no one thought to look. When the teens vanished, Carl had been weeks from retirement. He submitted his papers early and moved without ceremony into a trailer on the outskirts of town. No party, no farewells, just gone, quiet as ever. The timing hadn't seemed suspicious then. The entire town had been too consumed with grief and confusion to notice. Detective Monroe did. She tracked him down through a trail of property records and utility bills. He lived in a decaying mobile home surrounded by stacked firewood, rusted tools, and an overgrown chain-link fence. The windows were covered in cardboard. A wind chime made of spoons clinked gently on the porch, an eerie lullaby in the dry Colorado wind. He opened the door slowly, leaning heavily on a cane. His eyes were pale, watery, and evasive. "Don't get many visitors," he said. Monroe kept her tone neutral. "We're revisiting the 2010 case, the teens." He blinked slowly, as if struggling to process. "Long time ago. Don't remember much from that summer." She noted his hesitation, not defensive, but rehearsed. She didn't press, not yet. Back at her office, she combed through archives, credit card statements, store records, digital logs where they still existed. What surfaced wasn't damning on its own, but together they painted something sinister. On June 5th, 2010, 2 days after the kids vanished, Banning had purchased 3 rolls of industrial-grade trash bags, a set of pruning shears, duct tape, and 5 pairs of heavy-duty gloves. Days later, a separate receipt from Logan's Hardware showed something odd. 2,000 pounds of landscaping gravel. Delivery address? Arbor Point Elementary. When questioned again, Banning shrugged. Maintenance work. The school had drainage issues. But Monroe's instincts pressed deeper. She called in favors, located retired staff, old volunteers from the original search effort. One name surfaced again and again. Don Herner, a geologist who'd assisted in ground scans during the initial sweep. Don remembered it clearly. There was a depression under the gym, big enough to cause real concern. A sinkhole. I flagged it, told the district it was unstable. 2 days later, they sealed it, fast. Poured gravel in, packed it down. Said it was taken care of. The gravel, the timing, the silence. What was buried beneath Arbor Point Elementary had been intentionally concealed, not forgotten, hidden, and Monroe knew, finally, where she had to look next. Arbor Point Elementary had been shuttered for years, its windows boarded, its halls silenced beneath layers of dust and bureaucratic neglect. The gymnasium, once echoing with the slap of sneakers and whistles, now groaned with disuse, its paint peeled, its air heavy with mildew and mold. But beneath the warped floorboards and forgotten trophies, a secret had been cemented into the earth. Detective Monroe arrived before dawn, flanked by a forensic excavation team and a structural engineer. The warrant came with conditions: limited time, controlled drilling, minimized structural damage, but none of them cared about the gym's survival. What lay beneath was the focus, what had been deliberately hidden 17 years ago. The service hatch was almost invisible, recessed into a janitor's closet behind a wall of rusted metal shelving. Monroe's gloved fingers found the latch beneath layers of grime. When it creaked open, the smell that hit her was not rot, but something older: dirt, iron, mold, and a faint metallic tang that lingered in the throat. Beneath the hatch, packed gravel, layered thick and unnaturally even. They brought in the core drill. It took 3 hours to penetrate the plug. Poured concrete over compacted fill, not an accidental collapse, but a seal, a deliberate one. As the final segment broke loose, a hollow sound echoed upward. The engineer nodded grimly. There was space below. They widened the breach and descended by harness. The cavity was 10 feet deep, 15 wide, built with poured walls and no windows. A bunker, by all appearances. There was no official record of its construction. Inside, the silence felt alive. The floor was lined with old foam mats, warped and blackened with mildew. 4 metal frame beds lined the far wall, their thin mattresses brittle with time and discolored by moisture. A plastic table sat overturned in one corner, 2 broken chairs beside it. Scattered across the floor were traces of habitation, cracked water jugs, energy bar wrappers, a rusted flashlight, a child's pink hair clip. But it was the walls that stopped them. Scratches, hundreds of them. Fingernail grooves etched into concrete, wild and panicked in overlapping bursts. Some shallow, others dug so deep the concrete had flaked and crumbled at the base. Desperation, frozen in stone. And above one of the beds, taped with yellowed masking tape, was a photo. 5 teenagers, their faces unmistakable. Tyler, Mia, Jordan, Hannah, Connor. They were standing shoulder to shoulder, unsmiling, not posed, not playful. Their expressions were tense, tight lips, wide eyes, shoulders drawn inward like they'd just been told not to move. And beside them stood a 6th figure, taller, wearing what looked like a uniform shirt, but the face had been violently obscured. Not by time or decay, but deliberately, gouged, scratched, torn with something sharp. Repeatedly. Someone had wanted that person erased. But even faceless, their presence remained, and it reeked of control. Monroe stared at the wall behind the photo. Someone had written something there, long faded beneath mold and scarring, but 2 words were still barely legible in pencil. He watched. The call came through just after 3 a.m., a nurse's voice brittle with disbelief. We think we have someone you're looking for." The file she referenced was thin, mostly behavioral assessments and conflicting psychiatric diagnoses. The woman had been admitted in early 2011 under the name Jane Doe 34. No ID, no coherent history. Found wandering a gas station parking lot off Highway 26 in rural Wyoming, barefoot and bleeding from her palms, unable or unwilling to speak. She had never spoken more than a whisper in 16 years. Until now. Detective Monroe arrived at St. Agnes Behavioral Health Center under heavy snow and heavier anticipation. The woman sat curled in a chair by the window, pale against the light, her frame gaunt, her fingernails short and bitten down to the quick. Scars mapped her arms, some healed, others still pink with time. Her hair had gone prematurely gray, but Monroe saw her at once. Mia Reyes. It took a swab and 24 hours for the DNA to confirm what Monroe already knew. Mia was the first and only one found alive, but the girl who had vanished at 17 had been replaced by someone else, shrunken, silent, and fractured. For 3 days, Mia wouldn't make eye contact. She flinched at the sound of doors, refused food unless it was left on the floor beside her bed. She never slept through the night, and she wouldn't speak. Until Monroe sat down, alone, across from her and gently laid the photo on the table, the one recovered from the bunker. Mia stared at it for almost 5 full minutes. Her lips moved without sound. Then, like a lock finally forced open, her voice emerged, cracked and quivering. "He told us. He was a teacher. Her gaze didn't lift from the image, but her fingers began to twitch. Said we were chosen. Said we had something they didn't. Strength. Loyalty. Her breath quickened. He kept us underground. He said we'd be safe there. Said the world above didn't understand. Monroe leaned forward, her voice soft. Who was he, Mia? Mia's jaw clenched. Her eyes, ringed with dark circles, flicked to the gouged face in the photograph. It wasn't Carl, she whispered. Carl watched the gate. He cleaned. He brought food. But he didn't choose us. Then who? She hesitated, then exhaled through clenched teeth. The real monster. He wore a badge. The room seemed to fold in on itself. Mia drew her knees to her chest and stared out the window again, as if the answer might return from the drifting snow. Monroe didn't press further, because the implications had already begun to bloom like frostbite in her chest. Deputy Lawrence Keene had always been the man you waved to at intersections, the uniformed presence who helped load groceries for elderly widows and coached Little League in the summers. He'd been with the county sheriff's department for over 20 years, a fixture of quiet authority. Polished boots, easy smile, a clipboard under one arm, a joke always ready. Parents trusted him, kids liked him. He was the kind of man who made people say, "Nothing like that could ever happen here," which was precisely how it had. Detective Monroe found his name buried in a staffing roster from 2010, School Resource Officer, Arbor Point Elementary. The title had carried no weight at the time, just a formality, a friendly presence in a hall full of children. But in light of Mia Reyes's words, it became the axis around which everything turned. Then came the envelope, unstamped, slid under the door of Monroe's car during a late-night stop for coffee. Inside, a printed satellite image of a remote lot in southern Utah. Coordinates typed neatly at the bottom, one word scrawled across the back. Keene. Property records confirmed it. Purchased in August 2011, 6 weeks after Keene's quiet retirement, paid in full. No construction permits filed, no forwarding address ever listed. He vanished from Arbor Point like vapor. No one thought to question it. Monroe contacted the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit. A team was mobilized within 48 hours. What they found under the bleached Utah sun was not a home. It was a design. A structure sunk into the desert floor, accessible only through a steel hatch concealed beneath an old weather tarp. Inside, cinder block walls, no windows, and a thin trail of artificial light from battery-powered lanterns nailed to the beams. Journal entries filled an entire desk. Spiral notebooks, some water-stained, others meticulously preserved. One began, "Control isn't cruelty. It's refinement. They can only be their true selves without the noise of the world." Another page read, "Emotional resilience requires isolation. They must break before they can evolve." Along the far wall hung a pegboard, items displayed like museum artifacts. 5 student ID cards, a necklace engraved with the name Mia, a tattered hoodie, a crumpled bike map from Arbor Point Park. And beneath the floorboards, dug into the compact earth, forensic teams uncovered a shallow grave lined with plastic sheeting. 4 sets of skeletal remains, positioned side by side, as if placed with care. Dental records confirmed what the town had long buried under denial. Tyler Morgan, Hannah Fields, Jordan West, Connor Blake. Their story had not ended in the forest. It had ended here, in silence, in darkness, beneath the hands of the man they were taught to trust. The arrest warrant went out across state lines within hours of Mia's testimony. Lawrence Keene's face, the same one once smiled at in school yearbooks and sheriff's department fundraisers, now appeared on digital billboards, tagged as armed and dangerous. His last known sighting was a week prior at a gas station near Flagstaff. He paid in cash, wore sunglasses, said nothing. He moved like a man who knew how to vanish. But the story wasn't about his escape anymore. The damage had already been done. Arbor Point, once eager to move past its darkest chapter, now stood still. For the first time in 17 years, the town truly faced the hollow left behind. The vigil was held on a cold March evening, where breath curled in the air and candle flames flickered like fragile truths. Hundreds gathered, parents, students, teachers who once dismissed a janitor's oddness or a deputy's overfamiliarity. They carried photos, paper lanterns, and small, silent children who now asked questions their parents couldn't answer. Monroe stood near the back, not speaking, not dressed in uniform. Just watching, mourning, not only the dead, but the blindness that let them disappear. She thought of the lockers left untouched, the names scratched into tree trunks, the chalk lines that had once marked search grids and now existed only as memory. And yet, there was Mia. Under protection now, relocated to a quiet residence monitored around the clock, she had found a way to speak louder than words. Her paintings, vivid, fractured, evocative, began appearing online under a pseudonym. One in particular caught the town's attention. 5 silhouettes in a tunnel, light blooming ahead. A 6th figure crouched in the corner, face blurred, hands reaching forward like a question never answered. The town library requested a copy. Mia sent the original. It now hangs, framed in the entrance hall, above a plaque etched with silver lettering. To the ones who vanished, and to the truth that was never buried deep enough. And at Arbor Point Park, where the slide had once been an afterthought, a new sign was planted in fresh concrete. Beneath it, flowers are laid every June. We see you. We remember. There was no parade, no triumphant closure. But there was clarity. The fog had lifted, not just about what happened, but who let it happen. It was never the forest that swallowed them. It was the silence of trust misplaced. The quiet hand that waved. The uniform no one questioned. That was the real tunnel, one everyone had walked through, eyes wide shut,